Hello, my friends. Thank you for joining me today at the Punla coffee table. Get a cup of coffee or tea and settle in so we can have our conversation. And I'm going to start again with this quote from Douglas Grissom. I think it kind of makes sense, and I'll put it in my own words. If anything I say gives you wisdom, then it probably is coming from God. All the nonsense, that comes directly from me. So I'm not claiming any special revelation on this topic. I just want to share my thoughts on this topic because it's been a topic that I've heard a lot about recently, and people are very emotional about this. So I'm going to continue to discuss what I call the Great Escape, or the doctrine of the Pre-Trib Rapture, and why this doctrine, it troubles me personally. And I want to recap the first 5 reasons we talked about in part 1 and part 2 of this series. Number 1 was, this doctrine makes me very sad, and that's because if we are gone prior to the tribulation, who's going to be shepherding the new believers that are coming during the tribulation? Just the thought of that makes me very sad. Number 2, why is the book of Revelation of Jesus Christ in the Bible? If the church is gone prior to the tribulation, then what's the purpose of the book of Revelation being an encouragement to the church? We're already gone. We're not going to experience those things. Number 3, how many second comings are there? And now I personally believe in one second coming. And that's coming, let me back up. I personally believe in one second coming. But if you're inclined to believe the pre-trib rapture, then it requires Jesus to come twice. Once at the rapture, and then roughly 3.5 years later, he comes for his second coming as his triumphant return to earth, which is, that one troubles me. Number 4 is, how many mass resurrections are there? I believe in 2 mass resurrections, as it is told in the Bible. First resurrection of the believers to glory, and a second resurrection to the non-believers to damnation. And that's what the book of Revelation talks about in Revelation 20. And then my 5th reason was the Revelation martyrs. Who are they? I'm troubled with the concept that a new believer without any support from mature believers would be able to withstand the tribulation all the way to death. If we're raptured out prior to the tribulation, then who's there that has the strong faith that could be martyred? And there's going to be many of them if you read Revelation. So I'm not an expert in pre-trib doctrine. I don't expect to change anybody's mind with what I'm going to say. I'm not trying to convince you. Our purpose in this conversation is really just to say no one can be certain about these topics. And if you're in the pre-trib camp, and God bless you if you are, the key is don't hammer people with your belief, because you can't prove it with the Bible. So let's pick up our conversation with the next reason that I don't believe in the Great Escape doctrine. And my reason number 6 is the origin. And if you're a believer in the pre-trib rapture doctrine, I'm sure you've heard these next 2 arguments. So excuse me that it's going to be a reiteration for you. But for those that aren't familiar with these doctrines, I think it's important to understand the origins of these things. The origin of the pre-trib rapture it's a modern concept. I was very surprised to learn that the Great Escape is a modern Christian doctrine. And what I mean by modern is there's no evidence this doctrine was taught in the church prior to 1857. Most attribute J.N. Darby as the first to talk about this. Some believe Darby was influenced by Margaret MacDonald, who as a teenager had a dream in 1830. But later, MacDonald claimed not to believe in the pre-trib rapture, but in fact, she believed in a post-trib pre-wrath rapture. Now, people will argue about the exact origins of this doctrine, which is sometimes referred to as as dispensational pre-trib rapture. I don't really care for doctrine names. It gets complicated. The words are hard to say. But regardless of the exact origins of this doctrine, the doctrine was not taught in churches prior to 1857, when Darby began preaching about it. Now, by all historical accounts, it appears that the doctrine was not widely accepted until the Scofield Reference Bible was published in 1909. That's nearly 50 years later. The Scofield Bible was one of the first study Bibles with a commentary, footnotes, and references, and people loved it. The Scofield Bible promoted dispensationalism, pre-trib rapture, as well as the gap theory of creation and other doctrines that were not widely accepted prior to 1909. Do your own research. Don't believe me. When someone gives you references and sources like I'm giving you, go find them for yourself. Don't just take someone's word for it. Go test it. Test it for yourself. And I challenge you to do that. Look up the history. And more importantly, you'll see people that will reference older references for pre-trib rapture doctrine. Go find those. Don't trust that reference that says, oh, it was talked about in blah, blah, blah. Go find it. If it doesn't exist, it doesn't exist. And I've not been able to find any. So regardless of your belief on this topic, it appears that the doctrine of pre-trib rapture is a modern concept, and it wasn't taught. You can't trace it back to the early church fathers. Whether it's true or not, it was not important to those early church fathers. My reason number 7 is a little similar. The pre-trib rapture doctrine appears to be a Western concept. If you look at churches around the world, this concept is mostly taught in Protestant evangelical churches originating from the U.S. or Europe, or that are influenced by them. It's not a popular doctrine in countries where Christians are facing trials today. It's not a popular doctrine in the Orthodox churches, in Africa and in Greece and in Russia, that date back to the Asia Minor churches prior to the Roman Catholic churches. So the origin appears to be through the Western culture. So you got to think about, what about the people in John's day when he wrote Revelation? They're being killed for their faith. There are people around the world today being killed for their faith. The concept of the Great Escape would not be encouraging to these Christians because they're already facing trials and tribulations, and they're dying for Christ. Future Christians being spared such trials might have actually been discouraging to them. The real question I think we need to ask is the American church, the Western church, ready to die for Christ? Or do we expect to be spared the hardships if we're Christian? We're not facing persecution today. If so, why do we have that viewpoint? When so many around the world face persecution and death for their belief in Jesus, why would we in the West believe that we will not face these kind of hardships for our beliefs? Now, I'm sadly convinced this is appealing to us because we don't like the idea of facing trials, tribulations for Christ. We like our comforts here in the West. We have been living in societies where we're not threatened. But I want to read from the Gospel of John, chapter 16, verse 33. And these are the words of Jesus. These things I have spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulations, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Jesus is saying we're going to face trials. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean we're going to face the Great Tribulation, okay? But we're not going to have comfort as believers. The world's going to reject us. And I recommend going back and reading the entire chapter 16 here in John, so you can get the context of what I just read, to make sure I am telling you something that's consistent to what the text says. To be a Christian is a follower of Jesus Christ. You have to do something. You have to follow. If you're not following, then are you really a Christian? It's not just a mental exercise. I'm sorry. It's an action. I fear doctrines like the Great Escape and others like it are kind of encouraging Christians in the West to be complacent. We don't want to rock the boat. We don't want to speak out, because we might have to engage the world and the world might not like us for it. So we kind of believe that if we are just quiet in our corner, God's going to protect us from harm. And in the end, we're going to just be part of the Great Escape, and we will escape from the trials and the tribulations at the end times. Reality, if that happens, that's great. But what if the Great Tribulation comes and the Great Escape doesn't? Are we preparing Christians for troubles and trials and tests at the end? Or are we preparing them to fail those tests as they come? Again, if the Great Escape happens, great. But even if it is, even if this doctrine is true, we should really be focusing our efforts in the Christian church on preparation and engagement until that end comes, not a rescue from our troubles. Because when we're focused on that, we end up being scared to actually face the things that God really wants us to face. It just seems like this doctrine does not help us build strong Christians. It does not help me to follow Christ. It doesn't help me to do what he's asking me to do, which is put my life at risk when I go on mission trips. It does not encourage me to engage the world in ways that might result in my loss of comfort or even my loss of life, my liberty, my freedoms. Just think about it. I'm not saying I'm right. I could be wrong. Only that what should our focus really be as Christians? This kind of a doctrine or what Christ is asking us to do? And I'm going to leave it up to you to make that decision. I'm going to stop here for today. So this is my first 7 reasons why the Pre-Trib Rapture doctrine or the Great Escape really troubles me. It's not about whether it's right or wrong in a lot of ways. It's really about what it is encouraging people to do or discouraging them from doing. So let's close with a prayer. And I really encourage you to come back for episode 4 and 5, because we're going to dig into the Bible. We're going to look at the rapture scriptures and see what they really say. I don't know what it's going to reveal. We're going to learn together, okay? Lord Jesus, thank you for your revelation. This revelation about end times that encourages us to prepare and engage. I know only you know the truth about these future events, and I'll read your word, and I'll ask you to reveal your message to us. Be merciful, Father, and guide my words so they might be aligned with your word and your will. And I pray that I will, stay out of the way and just let you reveal to people what you want to reveal to them. I ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen. So thanks a lot for joining me today at the Punla Coffee Table. If you like the message, please press like. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe to our channel. It really helps our ministry. And you can leave comments here on our website, or you can email me directly. I'd love to hear from you. So until next time from the Punla Coffee Table, God bless.